Head on Fire is a Patreon-supported podcast. Supporters of the show get early access to audio and video content, episode archives, monthly roundtables, a book club, and more. All benefits are offered on a sliding scale, so no matter your level of donation, you never miss out. If you like this show, consider supporting it with $1 a month or whatever you can at patreon.com/headonfirepod. Thanks, and enjoy the show. Hey everyone, and welcome to the first episode of Head on Fire. I'm your host, Don Martin, an author and artist, and somebody that has an incorrigible curiosity about life. That's what Head on Fire is, actually. It comes from a quote that I've held dear to my heart for a really long time. Seek illumination, the way a man with his head on fire seeks water. To me, that means that if you are searching for something, for spiritual enlightenment, for personal fulfillment, you need to continuously and fervently seek it. But more than just asking questions, you need to actually seek answers. And recognize that sometimes those answers are going to make you a little bit uncomfortable. And that's okay. Learning can be uncomfortable. And sometimes it should be. Some of us have been put in a place of privilege and position long enough without ever having our comfort challenged. But don't take my word for it. In a search for answers to life's biggest and smallest questions, I would be remiss if I passed myself off as the ultimate expert, the person with the answers to life's biggest and smallest questions. That's why Head on Fire is going to be a series of conversations with actual experts in interesting, often overlooked or misunderstood fields. These could be academic, these could be scientific, these could be practical, these could relate to pop culture. It could be lots of things. We're looking for meaning in all corners, in all facets of life. I hope that you'll go on this journey with me. Okay, enough of that. Let's talk about today's guest. Have you ever seen The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina? Or maybe A Series of Unfortunate Events? If you like those shows, you're really going to like today's guest. Joshua Conkel is a multi-talented screenwriter behind both of those beloved series, as well as hosting a podcast of his own called Hollywoo. And yes, of course, we're going to talk about the shows that you love and that he's very proud of. But beyond that, we're going to be talking about what it takes to break into the film industry. How did he make it? What did he do for all of those years before he did? And then, once you make it, how do you deal with the pressure of putting something out into the world that millions and millions and millions of people see? How do you cope with going online whenever everyone on the internet seems to have an opinion about the thing that you have been working on for months or years at a time, thinking that you did something wrong or you did something terrible? How do you quiet those voices and actually create? It's an all too familiar conversation for anyone in any kind of creative field, whether you're professional or not. How do you balance doing something that you love with putting it out in the world, profiting from it? How do you balance the commerce and capitalism side with continuing loving something that you're very passionate about? But don't worry, there is juicy gossip about Chilling Adventures of Sabrina. So without any further ado, here's the interview. Joshua Conkel, thank you so much for being here today.
Hi, thanks for having me. What an honor.
Oh my gosh, I am a big fan of your work, and I really love the fact that when I was digging in to try to prepare for today's interview, I completely forgot that you helped create one of my very favorite shows, which is A Series of Unfortunate Events.
Oh yeah, that was my very first professional TV writing job, and it was such an honor. So wonderful to work on that.
Thank you for making. I loved it. I really, really loved it.
Oh, thanks. I loved it too.
I have to ask, what is it like going from? I mean, I'm a writer. Where writers are very. It's one of the few jobs that nobody else can really help you with. I mean, when you're I mean, it's there's just a certain amount of the work. I mean, you can have friends that you bounce things off of, mentors that you bounce things off of. But there's just, the bulk of the work you're just kind of doing by yourself in a hole somewhere. So what's it like going from that solo work to suddenly being in a writer's room?
Well, I've never written prose really. I wrote plays for a long time in New York. So you do write that by yourself, but then you go into a rehearsal studio with actors and a director. And so in that sense, it's collaborative. So I did have some practice. However, the thing about working in a writer's room is that, like on Twitter, if people are mad at a show, they'll say, oh, the writers did such and such. In television, you're really working for one person. It's all about the showrunner. It's not about you as a writer. You're there to help that person present their vision, good or bad. And so you're really just a hired hand. So you kind of have to put yourself aside in a way that you don't when you're writing your own play or your own screenplay or your own book or whatever. And so it's a little bit humbling.
It sort of sounds like I don't know if you're a Joanna Gaines gay, but I'm.
Yes.
It sort of sounds like the showrunner is the Joanna Gaines, and you're just one of the people putting the plants wherever the hell she tells you to put those plants.
100%. But the thing is that, like, if fans get mad at the show, you still take the hit. And you want to be like, I didn't do that. Like, that's not me. You know what I mean? But you can't. So you just sort of have to take the hit. But you make up for it in just money, because writing for television is so lucrative compared to writing books or writing plays or even screenplays. It just pays so well, and you get paid every week, and it's like sort of the only writing gig that is reliable in that way.
Oh my God. So, you mean after you write a book, we're not all millionaires? Like films seem to
Rowling. Thank God, in some ways. But,
I am increasingly obsessed, especially being on the other side of my first publishing debut, that all of the films that I remember, or TV shows or something that are sort of based around a character that wrote a book 10 years ago. Yeah. And somehow they're still living off of that money.
I know. It's so common.
It's just like, oh yeah, he wrote a book, and that explains how he's taking his entire family to Paris or something. Like, it's just, right. I'm like,
it's such a trope.
I love that. It seems that, a lot of people, especially creative people, have to navigate that sort of line of wanting praise. I mean, obviously we put ourselves out there because we think something about our work is good, and we want other people to see it and consume it. But in a situation of the collaborative writing, it sounds like there needs to be a little bit of an ego death.
Yes, there does. Unless you're the showrunner, in which anyone that I know who has become a showrunner has gone completely insane because of the responsibility. Basically you're the president of a company. You have like 200 people under you. You have the writer's room, of course, but also the actors work for you. The crew is working for you. You are the top man or woman on the show. And so the responsibility is intense, but also the ego flaming is intense too. And I have very close friends that have become showrunners who just went completely batshit and are still my friends, but are just like a very different person now.
They've now become the friend that you have to explain before they come to the party. Like, okay, yes. This is Sandra. Before Sandra gets here, I just need to let you know she's a lot.
Yeah.
But she did just show run, Zimmelblob 101. So everybody right. knows it. You get it.
It's a little bit like being friends with the movie star, except they're not famous. They only think that they're famous. But it's just like the relationship is one-sided sort of, and it's about them, and you know what I mean? It doesn't matter how long you've been friends or whatever. It's like their life has completely changed, and it's sort of about them, which is fine if you accept it for what it is.
What's really interesting about what you're saying right there is that I am becoming increasingly obsessed with people who are just, the sun, moon, and stars in a very niche community. I just love people who are just like stratosphere famous to like 7 people. And I love, that happens in like theater. Yeah, it happens in like theater. It happens in, just a lot of like niche communities. And it sounds like show running is sort of like that, in that like Hollywood, the people who know, they get how big you are.
Yeah, I mean, some of the most powerful people in Hollywood are not famous because they're executives or they're producers or they're showrunners. They're people who are more behind the screen. And I mean, everyone knows sort of like who Shonda Rhimes is or
Sure.
Ryan Murphy, but
Sure.
there are dozens and dozens of people like on the level just below them who are
Mhm.
multimillionaires many times over who are not household names. And so Hollywood is like full of those kinds of gatekeepers. Yeah, it's a really interesting, weird place to work.
It's sort of like in the publishing world, like editors and agents.
100%. Yeah,
Editors and agents are incredibly powerful. They hold all of the keys to the kingdoms, and nobody knows who these people are.
totally.
Except
100%
writers.
the same. Yeah.
Like, like there's editors and like agents and stuff whose like names are like whispered in hushed tones.
Yeah. I mean, I spent many years as a playwright in New York, and like the most famous, successful playwrights of my generation are not famous. You know what I mean? Like, because no one knows who playwrights are. I remember I used to be in like cabs or lifts, and people would ask me what I did, and I'd say I was a playwright, and they were like, if they even knew what plays were, first of all, they would be like, "Oh, have I seen anything that you've done?" And to be like, "Well, do you see plays?" Be like, "No." So it's a very humbling experience. So TV is definitely a lot more gratifying in that way. At least people have sometimes heard of the show that you work on or have seen it in some cases. So that's nice.
How long did it take you to break in?
Uh, Over 10 years. And I did
Uh-huh.
it by accident. I never intended to write for television. I just was a playwright at a moment where a lot of playwrights were sort of being scooped from New York and sent to LA. So it sort of happened at the same time as like what they call peak television or the golden age of television,
Sure.
starting with like Sopranos and all those shows to now and the explosion of streaming services. Hollywood is just like stuffed with playwrights from New York writing for television. Most of my colleagues of my generation are in LA or at least in LA part-time. So I see people from my New York theater days constantly.
I want to ask a weird question, but are you happy you broke through?
Yes, although I mean, what does it mean to break through? Your last job could be your last job forever. There's no
Mm-hmm.
guarantees in this business, and it is like any business, racist, homophobic, classist, ageist, all of those things. As much as it's quote unquote liberal and interested in identity issues, it's still a business. And so it
Mm-hmm.
falls into all the trappings that other businesses fall into. So you never know when your job is going to be your last. And I don't care if you're Shonda Rhimes or Ryan Murphy, you were always lucky to be working.
It's
That's the
interesting that
key.
you say that. I hate to name drop, but I had the privilege of speaking to Peter Page a few weeks ago, and
Mhm.
he said that the business has changed in such a way that even Shonda, even Ryan Murphy, he's like so little of even their work uh, is getting made these days. If they have 10 ideas,
True.
maybe 2 or 3 of them might get picked up, and maybe one of those goes on.
Your chances are always really bad just for all sorts of different business reasons. And then also at the same time, there have been changes in the industry that make it less profitable for writers. So for
Mm-hmm.
instance, the switch from network to streaming services, you're no longer getting residuals. Streaming services don't give you residuals. You're going from what used
I
to be
didn't know
22
that.
episodes. Oh yeah. Or you do, but it's like $3,000, forever in perpetuity, as opposed to like if you wrote on CSI for
Uh-huh.
one season, every year a Brinks truck full of money is showing up at your house for the rest of your life. So compared to that old network model, it's much less profitable. And also, there used to be 22 episodes per season as compared to like 8 for most streaming shows or 10. So for all sorts of business reasons, the writing in Hollywood has become less profitable.
I'm gonna admit something that may not be popular in this conversation of two, but I'm really happy about like the 8 to 10 episodes per season.
Well, creatively, it's much better. Shows tend to be
Yes.
stronger,
Okay, thank you. I'm so
more
glad you
I
think
think
that
I
way.
think everybody I think everyone thinks that. It's just like, you want to earn more money as a person who is working
Well,
a
yes.
job. That's all. That's all.
Absolutely. I just, going back, the pancetta made us all go back and binge watch comfort shows. And I'm like, going back and watching, big shows, you mentioned Shonda Rhimes, so you go back and you rewatch Grey's Anatomy and you're like, okay, I can get into this. And then like 37 episodes later, it's like, am I still on the same season? Oh my God. And it used to be worse. I Love Lucy was like 30 something episodes a season.
Yeah,
It's
yeah,
like, oh my
yeah.
gosh. Yeah.
Yeah, I tried to watch the soap opera Dark Shadows from the 60s, which is really
Ooh.
fun and campy, but that was on 5 days a week as a daily soap opera. And
Yeah.
so you'd be like, I've been in this room where this little ghost girl is singing London Bridge is Falling Down for a month. Like, I can't spend any more time here.
Yeah,
So yeah,
I don't know how people that do soaps do it, or at least I guess you just
there are
kind of have
hardly
to.
any around anymore. There's like two of them left, and they're mostly like on streaming or whatever. Like it's like a dying
I feel
art
like the
form.
new soap opera is just whatever the CW is putting out. Just
Yes,
that is a soap opera now, and maybe
for
the
sure.
Marvel Cinematic Universe that might have become some kind of
No
film
comment.
version of a soap opera.
I fucking
Okay,
hate the Marvel Cinematic Universe so much. That's my comment. I hate it.
I'm hiding all of my comic books.
We don't have to go into it.
Okay, so you were a writer on The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, so I have to
Mhm.
ask you about this. It
Great.
was a massive, massive hit. It had crossover with the CW show Riverdale. What is it like trying to navigate, going to work every day, knowing just the size of fan base that's out there for that kind of content?
Well, you don't really know at first, right? Because the show hasn't been on and you're working on the first season, so you don't know if it's going to be a hit or
Sure.
not. Although, I mean, that is IP and it belongs to Riverdale and Archie and stuff, so you have like a little bit of a sense. Um, in many ways, it was just a job. Like I said
Mm.
earlier, I'm not Roberto Aguirre-Sacasa, who's the showrunner. I'm just somebody who works for him. So you just show up every day and you're trying to do your best work and present your best ideas and get in good with him so that your ideas make it to air. And also, that one was weird for me because I'm a witch. I practice witchcraft, and the show is about witches. So there's like a little bit of a pressure there to try to, in a sneaky but not bad way, guide the show in a way that is like honoring different witchy traditions rather than like shitting on them or or something like that. But at the same time, there's, I don't know, witchy people get so sensitive about these shows, and it's like, well, if you did a show about actual real life witches, it would be the most boring show on earth because it would be
I
like a
have
show
said
about
that. I
Catholics
have
or
said
something.
that 800,000 times. I said that in my book. I've said that in every interview I've ever done. I'm like, if you did a show about real witches, real people who identify as pagan, it would be, watch
Well, then,
as
but
the
you just
witch
said
goes to the
something.
bank.
I know it's true, but you also said something that's interesting too. Is you identified pagans as witches, and this is something that I had to point out when I was doing interviews for Sabrina all the time. Is that witches aren't all pagans. I'm not a
That's
pagan.
true. This is
And
true.
there are witches that worship the devil. There are many of them. I
Yes.
mean, there's just no one path in this. And so
Yes.
people in the witchy world kind of have a tendency to be like gatekeepy about it. I hate that
Oh,
word because
yeah.
I can't believe I'm saying
Oh,
it. But
yeah.
like, this is what witchcraft is or isn't. And it's like, you don't get to say that.
Oh yeah, the
Um,
season where the pagans were the bad guy. It was the pagans versus the witches, and I was just eating popcorn, watching social media just tear itself apart, trying to figure out whether they liked that idea or not.
right. Yeah. Well,
But how do
eventually the
you?
coven becomes pagans, right? So.
That's true. How do you deal with everyone having an opinion about your work? I mean, I write a book and it goes out there and a few thousand people read it and, they have their opinions and whatever. But when you write for TV, when you write for a streaming service, when you write for Netflix, that's an audience of millions. And
Yeah.
even people and it's the kind of show, both A Series of Unfortunate Events and Chilling Adventures, they become the kind of shows that get memed. They become the kind of shows that nuggets of them get passed around and people form opinions on it. So it seems like it's not just the audience of the show, but it seems like everybody has an opinion about the show. How do you navigate everyone having an opinion about your work?
It's hard. It's really hard to see people tweet mean things about it and stuff. I mean, of course, there are people who love the show too, which is great. But
Sure.
I would always see people that are ostensibly my oomphs on Twitter, like say a mean thing about my show, and it comes with the territory. With Sabrina, it was interesting because I'd always been really close to the vest about my spiritual life. And with Sabrina, it was really cool at first to like meet people like yourself and Pam Grossman and all of the other sort of public witchy people and get to talk about it for the first time and kind of come out of the broom closet. And that was really, really fun for a while until it wasn't. And I tried to start a podcast in 2020 that I only did like 15 episodes of it because
Oh, we're going to get to that.
I didn't like being so public with my spiritual life. And so the journey of it kind of led to me a little bit going back into the broom closet because I felt a little bit alienated from the witchy world. And my practice is so different than other people's that I saw in public spaces anyway, that I just felt a little, I hate to say it, like alienated and bothered. And so I kind of closed that door. Being on this podcast notwithstanding, I'm happy to be here and to talk about it. I'm not like in the closet about it, but I realized very quickly that I did not want to be like a public witch. Like I didn't want that to
because
be a thing.
I mean, just putting, people's spiritual path, people's spiritual beliefs and traditions and the journey that they go on to find those beliefs and traditions and figure out what works for them and what doesn't and where they go next on it. That is a deeply, deeply, deeply personal thing. And there is a part of that I understand for folks like you and I wanting to put a piece of that out there, to participate, to become a representation of that, visibility. We need more visible people being visibly themselves publicly and that kind of thing. So I get that, but oh man, the backlash if you, I don't know, tweet the wrong thing or read the wrong book, or there's the wrong thing on your bookshelf it's vicious.
Yeah.
So I totally get it.
And we're at a moment too where, as I did my podcast in the first half of 2020, my podcast was sort of about like being a woo-woo person, but also being skeptical about woo-woo things a little bit. That was like the theme of it. And what happened to me was that, first of all, these like occult bros started to email me about things that I had gotten wrong on the show, or they thought that I had gotten wrong. So that was annoying. But then also it became increasingly upsetting to me how much my community of like witchy or woo-woo people were anti-vax or in some way overlapped with the political right. And I felt very uncomfortable inhabiting that space because for me, trying to replace science and the mundane with magic and spirituality is a no-go. I think spirituality has to be supplementary to the mundane and the everyday because we still have to go to the doctor. We still have to pay our taxes. Most of us just can't be witches who live in a cottage in the woods and live off grid. You know what I mean? So like being anti-vax is completely unacceptable to me, whether you're a witch, a Catholic, or whatever. Like it's just, that's a no-go, a non-starter for me. And there was so much stuff like that was coming to my attention that I was like, I don't feel comfortable here.
Well, and to echo that, so many people with magical beliefs, whether or not witch is the word that you use or whatever, they don't think of themselves as having a supernatural gift. It is not above nature. It is not outside of nature. It is not extra beyond them. It is something intrinsic and immanent inside of themselves, inside of the world around them. It's part of the natural world. And so for me personally, that means that, natural science and appreciation for the natural cycles of things, just the natural world as it is, which includes natural science, which includes health and medicine and things. That's all part of it. So yeah. I agree. This sort of anti-science rhetoric that exists inside of the magical community is incredibly really disheartening, and it can make you just want to not say anything. I mean, it makes you want to crawl in a hole sometimes.
Yeah, that's what I did effectively in regards to this subject. I crawled into a hole and just kept talking about movies and television and stuff because it was easier, as toxic as those communities are online as well. At least it's not my spiritual life. And to be honest, I've started to become kind of uncomfortable with using the word witch to describe myself because my practice, I have a familial practice that is based in Appalachian folk magic.
Mm-hmm.
But no one in my family would have called themselves a witch, even though they were. They were all Baptist
Not at
women. You
all.
know what I mean?
Absolutely
So
not at all.
even though they were practicing witchcraft, they didn't think of it in those terms. They thought that they thought that these were gifts from God, and they were very
Mm-hmm.
devoutly Baptist. And so I'm not a pagan. I'm coming from that tradition and adapting it for my own life in Los Angeles, in the desert and being queer. So it's not, it's in some ways aspiritual and very pragmatic. It's about kitchen magic and cleaning and stuff like that. And so I'm even becoming uncomfortable with the word witch because of the experience of the past 2 years and coming out of Sabrina.
Well, the weight of labels themselves, especially as labels get debated and owned and then torn down and torn apart and vilified and stuff in social media and online spaces, just labels of any kind they just suck. They
Yeah.
just suck.
I just felt like I didn't know what to talk about with
Yeah.
witches because I don't work with the moon. I don't work with deities. I don't work on any schedule. I work when I need something. That's
Mm-hmm.
how my practice works. You don't have any money coming in, you put a jar of quarters by the door. It's like
Sure.
it's stuff like that. You make a recipe that connects you to your family and you say a little prayer over it. Like that's my practice. And that's all it is, really. It's very mundane, it's very pragmatic. And so when it comes to like deities and astral projection and stuff like that, I just felt like I don't belong here. and no judgment of those things either. No judgment at all. It doesn't align with my personal belief system, and it felt a little uncomfy after a while.
Yeah, it can get really uncomfortable trying to share, to be in this to share a label with just this diaphanous group of people, this diaphanous, ill-defined group of people that, the word that you ascribe to or, define yourself with just seems to mean very, very different things to them. I do like the idea of talking about opinion. I understand how public opinion sort of affected the way that you are publicly spiritual, but I want to go back to being a creative person and how does that public opinion, does it ever make its way into the writer's room? I mean,
yes.
We talked about everyone is talking about your show. And I mean, I understand not wanting to write for the audience, but to write for yourself or to write for the work. But like,
I cannot tell you how often we debated whether or not Salem was going to talk because of online chatter. It was at least 3 times a week. And as the show progressed, probably more often than that. But things like that get in all the time. And also, I don't know how new this is, but there are many things that I love and have considered myself a fan of. But fans now, and I guess it's because of social media and stuff like that, they seem to feel like they are owed a voice in the writer's room or that they deserve to be a part of the creative process. And the truth is that oftentimes, if you were to give them what they say they wanted, they wouldn't like it because they're not in the writer's room and they're not writers on the show and they don't know what's best for the show, even though they think they might. So I don't know. I think a lot of times fans manage to ruin the things that they claim to love just by abusing creators.
Yeah, I was going to ask you about that because I kind of want to dive in fandoms, not just, fans of something, but like these fandoms, these like, I'm sorry not sorry to any listeners out there offended by this, but like they form these like mini cults around shows, sometimes around actors and other personalities where it's like, I mean, it's especially some of the long running shows, specifically on the CW, like Supernatural has it, Riverdale has, but just, some of these shows, and they are so incredibly possessive of the material, of the characters, of the actors. Buffy had it. What do you think of the parasocial relationship that these fans seem to have with the characters and shows?
I mean, on one hand, you're lucky to have fans, and that's what keeps your work afloat. But on the other hand, I think it's bad. I don't think that people should have any assumption that they get to control their favorite shows, books, movies, art. I think it's very problematic, and it can really ruin the thing that they claim to love. If they're forceful enough, you can really fuck things up, or you can make creators not want to create that thing anymore. Or it's a very tenuous relationship, and the more that things become sort of like kowtowing to fans, often the worse they get. It's the same reason. Look, I guess I'm a little bit of an elitist. I don't believe in test screenings. I think,
Mm.
you're testing a new show or a movie. All they do is they go to Burbank and they find some random 24 people, offer them a Shasta to watch an episode of television. And who knows who these people are? They could have just fallen off a turnip truck. And then they get to dictate, just these four random 24 people get to dictate whether or not a show goes to air. It's preposterous. Um, so I do think that there needs to be tastemakers and sorry to use the word gatekeepers in most industries and art forms, because taste is subjective, but not everyone's taste is equal. I'm sorry. I know that's like a very unpopular thing to say in 2022, but that's just the way that it is.
Absolutely. There are reviewers whose opinion I care about. And then there's reviewers I don't know. I don't know why you get so much of a voice. Like, I
Yeah,
don't get
I
it.
mean, in so many ways, the democratization of the internet and of taste and consuming art and media has been great for society. But in other ways, it's sort of like, it's really annoying. I mean, I think, Fran Lebowitz said something like, there's too much democracy and culture and not enough
Mm.
culture and democracy. You know what I
Hmm.
mean? They feel that way a little bit, like where it's important, where it's like the government and the structures that hold our democracy in place. There's not enough democracy there, but then where there's too much democracy is like movies, books, like that sort of thing. So I don't know. I'm kind of like becoming increasingly. I'm a little bit of a contrarian just by nature, I guess, but I've been becoming increasingly contrarian in the sense that I think that there needs to be gatekeepers and tastemakers in the arts and culture. And I feel like that's like a really shitty, problematic thing to say, but it's just the way that I feel at this point.
How do you differentiate? And I think this is more maybe a pointed question at fandoms. But how do you as the writer differentiate, or maybe how should we differentiate between source material and what gets put on TV? Because your two biggest screenwriting credits so far are adapted works. One's a book
Mm-hmm.
series, one's well, the Chilling Adventures of Sabrina has had like 4 or 5. I mean, or Sabrina
Yeah.
has had like 5 adaptations at this point. But do you have Melissa Joan Hart's number? No, I'm kidding. But how do you differentiate what you are making as something new while showing reverence to what brought people there?
I think it just depends on what the material is. With Sabrina, it never felt like an adaptation because one, Roberto, the showrunner, is the creative director of Archie Comics, so he has complete creative control over all of those properties. And two, we were doing something so different from the '90s sitcom Sabrina that it wasn't even relevant to talk about it. So it never really felt like an adaptation. Series of Unfortunate Events was interesting because it's a children's property, and
Mm-hmm.
the books are very slight in terms of story. So what we had to do there was like do a faithful adaptation of the 13 books, but then try to add new stories on top of that. So you're using the original books as kind of a skeleton outline and then trying to flesh it out with new stories because the books are too slight to support a TV show on their own. Series of Unfortunate Events was interesting because the fans were adults, basically. They were people in their early 20s who'd grown up with the books. And I didn't read those books because I'm a little bit too old. So I read them in preparation for the show. So I had an adult's, more, I think, objective perspective on the books. And so what I'd see when season one came out was that these fans who had read it as a child and now were adults would complain that Count Olaf was not scary on the show like he had been in the books. But I just read the books for the first time as an adult, and Count Olaf is never scary in those books. The books are always wacky and funny, and they only remember it that way because they read it as children for whom Count Olaf is very scary. And so they continue as adults to feel like Count Olaf is scary when he objectively never was. And so it's just a lesson in how readers and viewers and consumers of art it's just not objective, it's subjective,
See,
the
what's
way
interesting
that you
is
carry it with
because
you.
my next thought, when you're talking about that adaptation specifically of Lemony Snicket, is how not scary, but how terrifying the show becomes over time. I mean, there's certainly a creepy wackiness factor, but there is a terror that begins creeping in on the edges of the storyline when you think of the implications that there is this sadist who is trying to literally kill children, and all of the different ways in which he does indeed kill people. Like, there is a terrifying factor to that show that gets creepier and creepier as it goes along, and I adored it.
I
Could
think
not
what
tell
Daniel
you how much I adored it.
Oh, thanks. I love the show too, and I love those books. And Daniel Handler has become like a mentor and friend of mine, who's Lemony Snicket's real name. I think what he finds terrifying is ignorance and stupidity, which is why the children are just constantly surrounded by incompetent, idiotic, ignorant adults. You know what I mean? Like, I think he takes up the tradition of Roald Dahl, who's somebody who really delighted in having intelligent children being surrounded by cruel, idiotic, stupid adults. It's sort of a series about, exactly. It's sort of a series about gaslighting. These kids are in real danger. They're telling everyone around them constantly, and everybody around them does anything they can to poo-poo their concerns. I think the real terror isn't just like everyone being ignorant and stupid around you and like not willing to help you when you know what's actually happening to you. It's a little bit like a children's version of Rosemary's Baby or something. You know what I mean? Like, I am in danger, help me, and like no one is listening.
In the case of The Chilling Adventures of Sabrina, it goes some places and starts incorporating deities and cultures and stuff from around the world. And I am somebody that has always screamed at the top of my lungs. There is a literature version of, I don't know, we'll just use a big figure from mythology. There's a literature version of Zeus that you can, that is a figure of stories. And then there is the Zeus of history that was a very real deity to a very real culture. And those are two different things. And I'm what is the pressure that you feel like, or did you feel any kind of added pressure of not just adapting, the material of Sabrina or coming up with storylines for Sabrina, but also finding a way to respectfully represent these deities and cultures and stuff on the show while still making something new?
I probably should have felt more pressure. And just based on the conversations that I had with people such as yourself, like witchy podcasters and journalists, I got the sense that I should feel more pressure. But truthfully, I didn't at first, because I think Pam Grossman says this in a really smart way. And you kind of just said this too, which is that witches, for better or worse, have always been story and fact at the same time. And they're always pop culture and also fact, and they always influence each other. So for instance, the example I use is I was a 90s teen, and I remember when The Craft came out and Wiccans were really upset about it and were really hated the movie. But the fact is that 20, 30 years, 25 later, however many years later, that movie brought so many people into witchcraft. And same with Harry Potter, frankly, a generation later. You can feel however you want about those books, and this is completely separating her transphobia. But those books brought so many people into different traditions of witchcraft, so they do a service as well as perhaps being problematic if that's the way that you choose to see them. So I was always aware of that not duplicity, that's not the word, that dual nature of writing a show about witchcraft. However, where I did get more stressed out was bringing in traditions like voodoo. That was the big one where I was like, we need to be, and I said this in the room, like, we need to be very careful about that. So we did a lot of research. We did talk to people who practice voodoo. So it just, that was where I was like, we need to be careful about this,
What is that? What does that research look like in a screenwriter room? Like, how, like, is everybody going back to school? Are there books? Is there a
books.
reading list?
Exactly. It's exactly that. There's a reading list, and everyone had to read these books. And that show, we always the table was always stacked with witchy books of different types. So,
can you drop that reading list? Because I really want to see that reading list.
I don't remember what any of them were. I would have to go back through old emails. And then there was also a writer who was like this writer who was African. She sort of took it upon herself to become like the voodoo expert. And so she just did even more research than everybody else so that people could ask her questions. And so often it would be that way, like, and not just in terms of witchcraft traditions, but everyone in the writer's room kind of has like, I'm a horror writer. So if there were like a scary scene that someone got stuck on, they could farm that out to me. And some people were really good at teen drama, and some people knew a ton about Wicca, so what I mean, it's like people tend to, you sort of organically become the expert in something sometimes in any writer's room. And so that kind of happened with this one particular writer and voodoo, even though we were all given a reading list.
Who do I need to thank for the exorcism scene?
That's me. I wrote that.
My God.
That's my episode.
It is probably my single favorite moment of the entire show.
Oh,
and
thank you.
I think I wrote that. I think I have it down somewhere in a book somewhere. Like, I think I love it so much. It's just so good.
Thank you. I write all of my own spells. And so that's what in real life. And so that's what I tried to do for the show. It's like, okay, if I were Sabrina and I had this parameter that they had to call upon this legacy of witches that came from the writer's room. So that was a mandate. And I was like, if I was Sabrina and I knew this, like, let me like create a spell. And so that's what I did. So I guess it kind of is a real spell that they're doing, really. And Priscilla and Frances are my actual grandmother's names that they call upon. They're canonically Spellmans now. Frances and Priscilla Spellman are in the list. So it had like that personal connection for me too. So yeah.
But there were some real life witchy, like, I did love the balance of myth and legend and folklore with real witchy people from the last 60 years. I just, it sent shivers down my spine. I loved it so much.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah, that's what I just do in my practice.
There were so many of those beautiful moments throughout the show when, especially in that first season, when you all took, from nursery rhymes and little bits here and there. What did you choose? How did you all choose, which old, weird, creepy nursery rhyme made it in?
It really is needs based. I mean, you have a story that you're trying to tell and you're all trying to crack the story together, and you're looking for anything that you can that will be a bridge to get from point A to point B. So really it's like finding the right tool for the job. And in this case, the tool is like Old Mother Hubbard or somebody from like nursery rhymes or real witch traditions or from a horror movie. You know what I mean? So it's like, it's really needs based and trying to find the thing that will fit your need.
Everybody has a hot take about Sabrina, about Series of Unfortunate Events, but certainly about Sabrina. What's your hot take? Do you have a hot take about the show?
I have to be careful about what I say because I don't want to alienate anyone or get myself blacklisted. But I will say that I often wish that the show did less. I often felt
thank you so much
that the show was trying to do more than it could really do. Like, I often felt like there were too many stories per episode. Just stuff like that. Like, I wish sometimes that I could take a black pen to scripts and just like edit a little bit more, but I couldn't because I'm not that powerful. You know what I mean? I was just a worker bee.
I mean, yes, I agree with you, but I think that that's sort of a problem of, the only thing that I have to say is like, it's the CW genre. It's this genre of show that is perfectly tailored for the audience of people that watch CW shows, because they do just tend to pack so many storylines into shows, especially once you get into like the second or third season or so. And I'm just like, I can no longer keep up, and I have no idea what the show's about anymore.
Yeah, some of that has to do with actors too. I mean, you fall in love with these actors and you don't want to waste them, so you want to give them good material, and that can lead you to like overstuffing episodes and
Mm.
perhaps keeping actors around longer than you should. And I'm not just talking about Sabrina, I'm just talking about like all shows basically. You
I
fall in love
remember
with
that you said
actors
that
and you want them around.
one of the ways that Chilling Adventures of Sabrina sort of reflected the way that you all fell in love with actors, or at least that the way maybe actors fell in love was the change to the Harvey Sabrina dynamic happened because didn't the actors for Harvey and I forget the other character's name?
Roz.
Yes, they fall in love in real life?
Yeah, they're a real couple in real life. So are Ambrose and Prudence. They're a real couple. I believe they're still together. And then Nick Scratch, Gavin Leatherwood, and Kiernan, Sabrina had such good chemistry that people started to ship them, and so we made them a couple. So you just kind of have to follow. You can write and plan ahead as much as you want, but once the actors get there, it's organically going to become something different, and you're better off if you honor that and adapt the script to the actors. Yeah.
My one note, if another season of Sabrina does ever get made again, it's just a note that I've been holding on to. So, I know that you said Kiernan and Gavin have this chemistry, but really I feel like me and Gavin would just be great on screen together. So I'm just saying, like, the number of times I've watched that turkey baster video.
I know. I just can't think of any of the actors that way because to me they're all kids. You know what I mean? Like I would go to set and like they were basically having their college experience up there. They had a
Sure.
lot of fun and it was a really warm set and everyone really liked each other. But those kids were just like having a time of their lives, and of course they were sleeping together and breaking up with each other and like all the trauma that comes with being in college, but on a set in Vancouver. So I just think of them all as children, although objectively I understand that they are hot. And
Objective.
Gavin is on the Sex Lives of College Girls on HBO Max now, which I haven't watched, but I'm
I
told that
haven't
his guy.
either. Oh, goody.
And it's a show
Well,
about sex, so I would get on it
I'm
if I were you.
I am watching it tonight. It is very cold here in Chicago, so I'm just going to warm up my night. I want to turn a little bit, and I do actually want to talk about Hollywood for a second because it
Okay.
was my favorite podcast of 2020. I
Oh,
grieve
thanks.
its passing every day. But Hollywood, Hollywood has always sort of had
Hmm.
this intersection with spirituality, spiritual fads of all types. What made you curious to sort of about the weird nature, the weird intersection of Hollywood and spirituality, magic, that kind of thing?
I guess because I live in that intersection, right? I'm a witch who works as a
Sure.
screenwriter in Hollywood, so it's just around me all the time. And like I am both interested in it and love it, but also I'm skeptical of it because I'm a pragmatic person. So, for instance, all of my friends are talking about this dog psychic that they all use. And I want to call the dog psychic and pay $500 or whatever ungodly amount it costs. But I also recognize that that's like absurd. And I catch myself at that intersection all the time. Um, like there were times in I can't remember what we were talking about, and like we hadn't worked for like 3 hours because Roberto had meetings, and we're all in the writers' room with Sabrina, and you could see the Hollywood sign. And there was a day that it had rained, and so there was a rainbow falling on the Hollywood sign, and we were just watching YouTube videos all day long in the writers' room and trying to figure out what to order for lunch. And somebody in the room said, if middle America saw what we were doing right now, they would be so mad. It's like exactly the terrible stereotypes that people have of Hollywood. And I don't know. I just think it's funny and interesting. And I didn't think that there was like a witchy podcast where people were kind of making fun of witchy things a little bit in a good natured way. And so that's what I was trying to do. However, I think some people kind of took it the wrong way and got really mad, and I would get pretty nasty emails, and it just wasn't really worth it for me.
I'm mad at those people.
You
If you ever want to talk
know,
about Hollywood things,
and I also
I'm free. I am
thank
free
you.
on Thursday if you are free. I am free.
It also was like it made me feel a little bit mean. So as much as I like, so what I would do on the podcast is I would find something and like dissect it a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
So it would be something like star seeds, which I think is something that's so dumb and preposterous. And so I would say that, and then people would get their feelings hurt, which I understand if it's something that you believe in. It's just, I think it's dumb. I just do.
Well,
And
but I
so it
also
would
think
be
that
like a
people
lot of
forget
that.
that people behind I am just a person with a
Yeah,
microphone doing
right,
I have no there is nobody I've received no certifications. I don't have
right.
I don't have any kind of stamp of approval. The Witches Council didn't say, you get to be a podcaster. My
Yeah,
opinion on anything. I even wrote a freaking book, and I kept said dozens of times throughout the book, I'm like, I am not, any kind of singular expert. The difference between you and me is that I put 100,000 words together and you did not.
yeah.
So, I have my opinion and view, and here, use that to go decide what you think now. Like, I think people, I don't know, there's this weird relationship that we have with creators of things now, and it's
Yeah,
weird.
I mean, it's hard. It's a hard place to navigate because I enjoy doing podcasting. And this is something that comes with just writing too. It's like there's a part of me that wants to create but doesn't want to be held accountable for that creation, which is not fair and it's not realistic. But like now I'm trying to figure out a way even to like write books instead of TV so that I really want to write like YA books and live under a fake name and live in a cottage in Washington State. Like
Uh-huh.
that's my 10-year plan. You know what I mean?
Uh-huh.
Like so I'm all about in my old
You want
age
to be
like
the next
find
Lemony Snicket, huh?
yeah, or somebody like that. You know what I mean? Like but Daniel's not like me because Daniel very much wants to be a part of the world, and I like actually don't. So I'm not a shy person. I'm not an introverted person, but podcasting was perhaps the wrong media for me because I truly don't want to hear it from people, which is the same reason that Twitter is so bad for me because I feel like a very vain desire to like put my opinion into the world, but I don't want people to come at me with it. So it's like I can dish it out, but I can't take it. And it's so stupid of me. And like, it's just like me and my mentally ill brain and I gotta cut it out. I've gotta just like retreat from the world fully
Well,
somehow.
but we're also of the age that like social media didn't mean what it means now.
Yeah,
Like we used to just kind of get to say things,
I
and
know.
it was
Twitter
sort
in
of under
2008 was so funny. It was like
so
Twitter was for
different.
jokes. It was for
It
tweeting a
was
joke, and that was it. You
and you
know?
were we were all pooping. It was and these were our poop thoughts, and this was
Yeah,
it.
that's
Like
it. And it was the best.
why are you taking my poop thoughts so very seriously?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And now I see Twitter, and it's like someone will tweet the age gap in licorice pizza is very problematic because blah 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 blah. And I just want to respond like counterpoint, so what? Like who cares? You can't possibly be upset about this. Like I have to remind myself constantly that there's an entire class of professionals whose job and identity are wrapped up in making people upset on the internet. And there's a subclass beneath them of people who are addicted to the outrage that is created. And you have to just constantly remind yourself of that because my energy is limited. I don't have time to be mad at licorice pizza. There are Republicans that are trying to get rid of our national parks. You know what I mean? Like, pick your battles.
Well, and I
Uh,
just think that people forget that the algorithm that runs all of these various social media apps and platforms and stuff thrives on engagement, and it continues to try to keep you engaged as much as possible. And the one
yeah,
thing that continues to create engagement more than anything else is outrage. So,
yep,
I love those statistics where it's like the majority of Twitter discourse is created by like 12 people. And those
yeah.
12 people are just sort of paid to be professionally outraged. And then there's like 3,000 bots that retweet them. And then, like that's it. Like that's where so many of your
Yeah.
thoughts come from.
And it turns out the studies have shown that people online find a sense of community in kind of ganging up on people together or being outraged
Yes.
about something together more than they do about positive things. And look, I get that. I love to talk shit. I'm a horrible gossip. So I understand that it
I
feels
love
good, and I
gossip.
understand that impulse. God, I'm the worst gossip on earth. But
I in a past life I was leaning over a white picket fence wearing a big floral dress, and me
know.
and my neighbor Gertrude were just talking shit about Nancy down the street. That was my past
Right.
life.
I mean, me and my best friend is Michael Kennedy. He's a screenwriter, and he wrote the movie Freaky. I don't know if you've seen that. It's really wonderful.
Love the movie Freaky.
But we're both really gossipy, and we will just like literally send other people's like demented tweets all day long. And that's our friendship is based on talking shit about other people in town. And yeah, I get
And
the delight of it.
you always know the gossip is good when it comes in a voice memo. Like
Yes.
if you get a text, it's one thing. If you get a DM, it's one thing. But if you get a voice memo, you better be ready for some piping hot tea. Excellent.
Yeah. And you could, on the flip side, you can tell when people have you muted on Twitter. You know what I mean? Like,
for
so
sure.
you haven't gotten a like from that person in 6 months. You're like, that bitch has me that's so muted.
100%. I'm like,
Yeah.
there's like 15 people. I'm like, y'all all have me muted. And you know what? My life is peaceful. I am much more peaceful.
Yeah.
It's great.
Fine.
Hollywood. Do you have a favorite Hollywood story? Do you just have something about the Hollywood? And is there a favorite story about an intersection of a Hollywood person being a little bit too woo-woo?
God, do I? Nothing
I
is coming
think I
to mind.
loved
I'm
the
so
Carrie
sorry.
Fisher. Wasn't there the assistant
Byron
to Carrie
Lane.
Fisher? Yeah.
Byron
That
Lane's
was
a
a good
wonderful
one.
author who had been the personal assistant to Carrie Fisher. And yes, he has a lot of good stories about her. And the actress Jessica Roth told a really great story about like not getting a part that she really wanted and being at God, what is this place? It's called like the Grateful whatever. It's like a restaurant here in LA that people know. It's like a vegan hippie restaurant, and like some weird old middle-aged woman coming up to her and giving her a crystal because she seemed sad. Like things
Love
like
that one,
that.
yes.
Yeah. Just like demented things like that happen kind of a lot. Or you'll be at a store and someone will try to recruit you into a cult. Or when I first moved here, my friend was like, "Do you want to go to this party, quote unquote party?" And the more I questioned my friend, the more it turned out it was this woman who lived in the hills and was very rich, but she was like quote unquote therapist. And what they did at these quote unquote parties is that this woman insulted you, and you paid for this privilege to have this woman like insult you over and over and over again. It was supposed to be therapeutic. It's supposed to like break you down in some way if you kept showing up every week. And it's like, I'm not paying some bitch to insult me. Like, I have a toxic brain. My brain does
I would go
once all day.
If I was in a good mental health space that week, I would be like, I want someone to come talk shit about me to my face. That would be fun.
Yeah.
There's just something so delicious about watching someone just talk shit about you to your face. And I'm just like, that is bold. I am good for you.
Is very goopy, and some of that is fun and some of it is really cringe. There's all sorts of like psychic development courses. And I think a lot of that is cool, but some of it is like, pay $100 for this water bottle that has an amethyst in it because it does such and such. Or it's like, that's bullshit. Come on.
Yes.
So I sort of delight in the absurdity of a lot of this intersection, I guess, is why I started the podcast. But it was too hard to maintain for all the reasons I've outlined.
So we stand, I don't want to say in opposition, but we stand on two different sides of the fence in two parts of cinema, let's say.
Okay.
One of them is superhero movies and the other is horror. And I love superhero movies and I do not like horror. And you are very much the opposite. And I've been dreading this moment, but I can't have a conversation with you and not talk about horror movies.
Okay.
What am I not understanding about horror movies? Am I just watching the wrong horror movies? I don't want to be scared and I don't want to see people get killed slowly or fastly either.
Horror movies are not for everybody. You don't have to like horror movies. There's no law saying that you have to like them. The case that I would make for you, I mean, you like Sabrina. Sabrina is a love letter to classic horror. You know what I mean?
Yes.
So I would
Yes.
suggest maybe looking up some of the movies that Sabrina is referencing. However, you don't have to like horror movies. For me, I started watching them very young. And when I watch a horror movie, I still get scared, but I like being scared. I find comfort in it. For me, it's like it reminds me of like being a little kid at a sleepover and like amping yourself up to watch a scary movie. You know, it's a little bit of the same feeling you get up before you go on a roller coaster. You know that you're going to be scared, but you're excited for it. And that's horror at its best. At its worst, it's just like so terrible that you can laugh through it and it's camp. So I find comfort in it, and I think it's really beautiful at its best, really fun at its worst. You know, like a bad horror movie is a lot of fun. As opposed to like a bad comedy, which is a real bummer. You know what I mean? So
True.
I
True.
just take comfort in it, and I see beauty in it, and I just love it. It's one of my
Do
favorite
you
things on this earth.
have like, I don't know, like a couple, like, do you have like a horror movie starter pack for a wimp like me that like wants to be
Have you
braver?
seen Have you seen Rosemary's Baby?
I've seen bits, but no, I've never actually just like sat down and watched the movie.
It's not particularly scary because it's old and our sensibilities are different. And there's a camp element, but it's also, as a gay person, it's got beautiful fashion and beautiful interiors, and
Love
it's really
that.
glamorous.
Love
I
everything
would
about
I
it.
would start there. I think that's a
Okay.
good place to start. Yeah.
Yeah, I remember finally watching The Exorcist several years ago, and I was like, well,
That
this
movie's
is
very
nothing.
scary. Oh, you
Is
don't think it's
it?
scary? I think it's one of the
No.
scariest movies. I think it's one of the scariest
No.
movies
I was
ever.
like, this is it?
I love that movie. I
No.
think it's very scary. I think The Shining is very scary if you've seen that.
Oh, I have. See, I keep thinking I've seen it because I've seen it referenced and sort of redone and,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
tributed in just everywhere and everything. Uh, yeah. Do you think American Horror Story is horror?
Yeah, it's horror. I don't. I'm not a fan. I find it overstuffed and a little
Oh, for
trashy.
sure. The problem with Ryan Murphy. Sorry, I don't. I'm gonna say this so you don't,
Yeah,
because you're in that world. I write books, so the problem with Ryan Murphy, any Ryan Murphy property, is he knows how to write three really good, intriguing episodes of an idea, and has absolutely no idea what to do after that.
yeah. I mean, yeah. I don't like that show. I'm sorry. I don't. I do think it's horror, though. Yeah, I think it counts.
Well, good. I like that. I mean, I don't know if I like it. I watch it, and
It's
every season I
campy.
keep thinking maybe one day it'll stick the landing.
I
Um,
loved Asylum, but that's the only season that I
Asylum is the best
really
season. Hands down,
loved it.
Asylum is the best season.
That's the first season that I watched. And then I went back and watched Murder House and I thought, this is good. And then I watched Coven and I was like, I'm out. Because I don't know how you
Coven
fuck up
is not
witches that
good.
bad.
Coven is not
That
good.
I love
Coven
witches
is
so much.
aesthetic.
And that was like, nope,
Coven has an aesthetic and a really good first three episodes, and it doesn't know what to do with the idea that it had. And I
it's a
don't know.
mess.
Yeah, it's a mess.
Mess.
It's a mess. Super. What's so?
It's less
Are
about the
you?
superheroes themselves. It's
Mhm.
more about the impact that Marvel and DC have had on the industry.
Okay.
For me,
There's no
I think,
more. Everything is either $1 billion blockbuster or nothing.
or $1 million indie movie that no one sees and
Yeah.
nothing in between. So it's had a very harmful impact on the industry. And I think that the fans can be a little bit demented in terms of
Well,
like going
yes.
after Martin Scorsese, or poor Martin Scorsese, who, by the way, not a living human being on this planet has done more to make cinema accessible to people than Martin Scorsese has. I mean, he has whole philanthropic organizations that keep cinema alive, and he donates all this money and blah blah blah. But these people come after him like he's Hitler or something because he said he makes even like slightly pejorative comments about Marvel movies, and people treat him like he's,
But also, why are
the
we
devil.
asking? I just don't know. I mean, that you're just trying to create a headline. Like, people, you know what
Yes,
you're doing. Like,
yes, of course, it's the
asking
journalists
Martin
who are doing it.
Scorsese about a Marvel like, why? He's not there to
Right.
promote a Marvel movie. Like, you
Yeah.
know what you're doing.
I think there's also an element to Marvel movies too, where, and this is kind of goes back to what we were saying about taste earlier. I find when people like something, they try to want to elevate it as a way of like
Yes.
rationalizing their taste for it. And I don't feel like you need to do that. And people didn't used to do that. People,
No.
you know, I call it turning Beyonce into bell hooks. You know what I mean? Like people will talk about Beyonce
Sure.
like she's the greatest feminist who ever lived.
Right.
And she's just not. And Beyonce's a great pop star, so talented.
Yes.
It's totally fine to love Beyonce for who Beyonce actually is. You don't need to turn her into bell hooks. You know what I mean? Like, it's fine to love a trashy horror movie without trying to rationalize why it's an important piece of art. And I feel like the Marvel Cinematic Universe kind of sees a lot of that phenomenon as well. Like people really elevating it to like the levels of like beautiful, important Greek tragedies or whatever. And it's like, no, it's a superhero movie, and it can be good and it's fine. You don't have to like turn it into something that it's not to rationalize.
Sure. I mean, you know, my only argument on that is I think with a lot of, but I think I have the same exact thought with anything that isn't just a documentary. You know, fiction helps us tell greater truths about ourselves because sometimes we need to see it in a different context. Sometimes it needs to be elves and orcs and a mountain, you know, a big bad in order to tell a great truth about ourselves. You know, I grew up reading comics. Sometimes you can tell a great truth if it's mutants. Sometimes you can tell a great truth if it's a scary clown or something like that.
Totally. I hear that. And I will say, to Marvel's credit, as much as I don't like it aesthetically as a consumer and its impact on the industry, I do think it's interesting what it's doing. I mean, I think your point earlier about how it's the new soap opera is an astute one. Like the bigness of the universe and how detailed it is, and the characters that live within that universe, and how it just keeps expanding. I do think there's something interesting about that.
Well, there is something interesting, and it's because it's finally a reflection of a comic book on screen. You know, that's what it's like reading comic books. And it really sort of started that with like Civil War. It started becoming more representative of what it's like reading a comic and just how bonkers, bizarre things can suddenly happen. And you're just like, okay, I'm here for this. Whatever. It's fine. She's got an evil twin that's actually a demon, or her kids are actually just like these captured souls from the devil. So that's fine. Okay, Wanda's kids aren't real, but they're also real. But okay, whatever. I'm here now.
I just can't with some of the fans will go on Twitter or wherever and act like they're, you know, a niche group or something, and like, and even directors will be
because you like Marvel movies.
I know, like geek culture is now like the mainstream culture. So like, it's weird to me when these directors will get on Twitter and be like, this one's for the fans. And it's like, who are the fans? Everybody. This is the number one movie worldwide. So it's like, it's something about it just feels a little disingenuous to me.
Though I do want to ask, because, you know, being more in the horror world, you know, I'm somebody that is always like, you know, like Spider-Man No Way Home is trying to allegedly make a bid for Best Picture this year. And I'm like, I don't know. You know, but I don't know. Maybe I'm just a weird person, and I have a weird idea of what an Oscar-worthy movie is and isn't. And anyways, but horror fans have the same kind of frustration with awards shows. So, you know, as much as people want to try to elevate the thing that they love, do you think that horror fans do that as well? Maybe.
Yes. Oh, yeah. And I call them out on it too. I think. Look, the Oscars are a certain thing, and I don't think that there are very many horror movies that should be up for Oscars. And it's not because horror movies aren't good. I think that's true of most genre movies. The Oscars are interested in prestige kind of art films and foreign films, or at least traditionally they are. That's starting to change. There's a lot of people who want to democratize the Oscars and do like an audience choice award and stuff. And for me, that kind of goes against the nature of what it is. I don't understand why horror fans want horror movies to be up for Oscars. I know that they're prestigious, but it's like, why do you care? Why aren't there horror awards? You know what I mean? I don't feel the need for that myself. I do think that there are movies that are Oscar worthy. You know, I think Midsummer and Get Out and Hereditary are horror movies that are good enough to win Oscars. But I also understand that we don't live in a world where those movies receive Oscars, and I'm fine with that and at peace.
I hate the movie Hereditary.
Why?
I hate it so much. I don't think
I
it makes a lick
love
of
it.
sense. It doesn't
I
tell
love
any kind
it.
of linear story. Somehow in the last 5 minutes, there's a cult, and that
I
wasn't in
love
any
it.
of the rest of the movie. That girl her head is just on the side of
Oh my
it.
God.
It is like those kinds of movies that were made in like the 60s and 70s that you're supposed to watch while high, just like those surrealist. Like it's
Yeah, like
what is
Holy
this?
Mountain by Jodorowsky.
Sure, like what the hell was Hereditary? And then just
I
suddenly she's
love
sawing her
it.
head off in the last 5 minutes. What is that?
I would say that it's like operating in the realm of the uncanny.
Midsummer, I will give you. Midsummer was good. I finally saw Midsummer in the last few months because I'm a wimp and it takes me a while to work up because I want to watch horror movies and I will watch them eventually. Even
Yeah.
Parasite, it took me a while to want to watch because I was like,
That's not really a horror movie.
I know,
But
like I
I was
know.
so happy when that won an Oscar. And I
Yes.
think a lot of horror fans were really happy, even though it's not really a horror movie.
It's not really a horror movie, but there's elements of dread and yeah, I mean, of course, me in any very serious drama, it takes me a while to work up the courage to just watch it because I'm like, I have to be in a very specific mood to watch this very depressing thing. So
I'm the opposite. I like my boyfriend will be like, "What do you want to watch?" And he'll always say like something light, and I just truly, literally never feel that way. Like if I'm by myself, I'm putting on a documentary about a serial killer or something.
See,
you know what I mean? Like,
give me whatever Melissa McCarthy wants to do.
right.
I'm here for joy.
I do love Barb and Star. But when I watched Barb and Star, I was like, I think this is the first comedy I've seen in probably years. But part of that is because they don't make comedy movies anymore, partially because of Marvel. That's almost no comedies in theaters anymore.
Well, there's no there's no more mid-budget movies. I mean, there's no mid-budget movies.
And there's all these filmmakers that can't make a movie anymore, like John Waters and David Lynch and people like that kind of work in that budget that it's just like it's so hard for them to do anymore.
Yeah,
anyway.
There's no more like the $10 million movie, a $5 million movie. Those are just gone. It's either we're spending $300 million on a movie or you get $50,000 on an iPhone and there is no in between.
Right, exactly.
Joshua Conkel, I want to thank you so much for spending a bit of your time here with me today, helping to relaunch my show. I can't tell you what an honor it is for me to talk to you. If folks want to connect with you, is there anywhere online that they can do that?
Yeah, I mean, the best place is Twitter. That's the place that I'm addicted to for better or probably for worse. And that's just at Joshua Conkel.
Do you have anything in the pipeline? Is there any adaptation? I remember last year you said that you had tried to pitch The Fascinators. Is there anything in the pipeline, anything working, any energy you're trying to put out there?
Yeah, so I have written a queer haunted house movie that you'll never see because you don't like horror. But hopefully
I will watch your queer haunted house movie. Okay. I will watch it opening day.
So hopefully that's going to get made this year, and hopefully I'm going to direct it, which will be my first time directing. And then I'm starting a new writer's room for an HBO Max show in March that I can't really talk about yet. And I'm writing my first novel, so we'll see how that goes. But
well, thank you so much for spending some time with me here today.
You too. Thank you so much.
Well, that's going to do it for our first episode of Head on Fire. My sincerest thanks to my first guest, Joshua Conkel. If you like this show and you want to support it, the easiest and freest way to show your support is to share the show on social media. You can also rate the show on Apple Podcasts or wherever you download shows. And if your podcatcher of choice allows you to leave a review, please do so. The algorithm that all social media content and podcasts are beholden to really likes engagement. So simply going on to your app and leaving a comment, even if it's just a few emojis, really helps to bump it up in the suggestion algorithm so that other people can find it. If you like the show a little bit more and you're feeling a bit generous, feel free to join my Patreon on a monthly basis. Patrons receive additional audio and video content, as well as archived episodes, a private Discord server, and a monthly book club. This month we are reading The Know-It-All by A.J. Jacobs, and next month we are reading Stiff by Mary Roach. So if you would like to get in on that, you can sign up at patreon.com/headonfirepod. You can also connect with me at headonfirepod on most forms of social media, and if you'd like to email me about this show or any other, the email address is contact@headonfirepod.com. And remember to never stop seeking illumination the way a man with his head on fire seeks water. Be well.